Good evening and Happy New Year. Welcome to the historic Hawaii Theater Center. I am Dave Moss, the Executive Director of the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra, and so glad you are joining us for Season 2 of Tuning Up with Iggy and Dave. Iggy, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Dave. I missed you all those weeks.
All those 2 weeks that we were apart. And, you know, I think over those 2 weeks, there were a lot of conversations about, could we sustain this? What was the response going to be to not having a weekly dose of Iggy for our audience? And the demand was unbearable. I'll tell you that, you know, the calls, the emails, the texts from our patrons and from our audience here over the past 2 weeks demanding a return to Tuning Up. And here we are.
I'm not sure if I believe you, but, you know, I have to say, let's look back to when did we start? August, July, August? Somewhere there?
It was July, I believe.
July.
We did almost 25, 26 tuning ups in season 1.
And coming here every Tuesday night felt like an oasis to be with you, with Greg, and all the people here at the theater. It was very special to be able to come every week and to live through the pandemic. And we're still here. We have more every week to present. We've had performances in the fall, in the winter. So there's been more of a culture, arts, civilization. So we're very lucky to be here. Many thanks to the theater to be here every Tuesday. I'd like to introduce to everyone, perhaps tonight's special guest. Dave, will you allow me to?
Oh, I was going to say, enough about us. What a better way. I don't think there is a better way of kicking off season 2 of Tuning Up than with our guests. So,
yes, I've known her for a long time. I've been very privileged to share the stage with her, to be invited to your festival many times. Please welcome Lisa Nakamichi. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just so wonderful to be back in Hawaii. You know, I've been stuck in Japan for almost a year, and I finally was able to make it back last Friday. So it is just so wonderful to be back home.
Well, we'll go through your life, but you've been splitting your time between Hawaii and Japan. So we haven't had someone from Japan tell us what the pandemic's been like. How has it been for you? So,
well, you know, things were rather controlled in Japan, actually. The number of cases were, you know, under 100 for a few months. Even during the worst time in March, April, May, the Japanese people really managed to keep themselves safe and healthy. However, just the last month or so, we've been seeing a huge spike in cases, and just last week, I think Thursday or Friday, the government has declared a state of emergency. But I'm here.
It's affected everyone globally. I should say, I just introduced you as Lisa Nakamichi, but you have so many titles. So you're a fantastic pianist. You're also artistic director of the Aloha International Piano Festival. I'm sure throughout the show, Dave will have questions.
Many.
So how can people ask questions to either
you
yes,
or thank
Lisa?
You, Iggy. Yes, we encourage you to join in our conversation tonight, and you can do so by texting the number on the bottom of your screen here. And we welcome questions for Iggy, for Lisa, for myself, you know, about the HSO, perhaps what the coming months might be looking like for us. We'll touch on that a little bit this evening here. But really, this is our way of continuing to create community. Think of this number as your front lobby, where you get to talk to the musicians and all of us around the HSO. And also, we have a quiz question this evening and that I want to get to very quickly because I may already be seeing answers to the quiz question that was posed online. Is that okay if we?
Please.
Okay. So, and we will return to this a little bit later this evening, but we do have a wonderful bottle of wine that we hope to share with the winner. Of course, that would be a winner that is here on Oahu for us to deliver this to you. Iggy, what is our bottle of wine this evening?
So there's one that's almost empty. This is ours, and the one that's full is for the winner.
We'll see how the hour goes, but yes.
So tonight's wine is a 2018 Bourgogne of Albert Pichot. Sorry, Albert Bichot, not Pichot, famous domain in Bourgogne. And this particular wine is a Vieille Vigne de Pinot Noir. So we all know that, or we all know. I knew that recently, that in Burgundy, the cépage, or the vineyard, is the grape is Pinot Noir. In fact, I remember years and years ago, I was in Burgundy, and I was sort of wine tasting. I didn't know anything about it. And sometimes the French can be a little bit rough with you, to the customer, because in France, the customer is always wrong. But anyway, I didn't know anything about wine, about Burgundy, and I just asked some dumb question, like, that parcel of grape, is that from this domain? And the lady told me, asked me, do you know anything about the cépage? The cépage is the vineyard in Burgundy. And it turns out you have a domain or an estate, but an estate can have different parcels of grapes in different places. They're all not grouped in one place. So, and in Burgundy, there's different elevation. So the really, really top wines are from the same parcel, but you can have other bottles that have grapes, Pinot Noir, from different parcels, and the elevation varies. So the quality is not as high. So I didn't know those things, and she just insulted me like only tourists in France can experience.
And now you've educated our entire audience to this. Join us next week for more wine lessons from Iggy. And this is, I seem to be the only one enjoying this wine so far this evening, but it's wonderful, and we look forward to sharing this with you. But the quiz question.
Yes, sure, I forgot.
Who was the only female professor of music to be hired in the 19th century at the Paris Conservatoire? Iggy, any guesses?
Perhaps, but we'll find out a little later at the show.
Yes, so please text your answer. We were starting to receive some correct and incorrect answers thus far. But yes, thank you for joining us. So now that that's out of the way, Lisa, I always like to ask the question. Take us back to the beginning.
Okay, sure. How far back?
Up to you.
Okay, so I was born in Japan, in Yokohama, Japan, and I was brought here to Hawaii. My family moved here when I was 12, and I spent my junior and high school days here in Hawaii. Grew up in Kailua High School graduate, yay. And from there, after graduating from high school, I auditioned for the Juilliard School, got in, and I got my bachelor's, master's, and my doctorate degree from State University of New York at Stony Brook. So that's sort of my brief bio.
Comes back to Hawaii here, and then let's see. So many questions are creeping into my head. We've had a number of guests join us recently and talked about their experience at Juilliard, a notorious musical institution that has been brought to life in so many movies. That has painted the institution for better or for worse. I'm curious what your experience was like, and how did you go from here in Honolulu all the way to New York City?
So my teacher, Martin Cannon, the late legendary Martin Cannon, was here in Honolulu performing a concert at the University of Hawaii.
Really?
His former student, who was the professor at University of Hawaii, Dr. Ed Shipwright, the late Ed Shipwright, had brought Martin Cannon over to do a lecture and a recital here. So, since I was a kid, it was always my sort of like my dream to go to Juilliard, you know, one of the best conservatories in the world, and I kind of like looked up to that school since I was a little girl, and so here Martin Cannon was in Honolulu, and I asked my teacher at the time, the late Ella Masaki, you know, that I would love to get a lesson with him. So that was when I was 16. And I had a lesson with Martin Cannon, and it was just an incredible 1 hour with, and I asked Martin Cannon, I said, you know, I would love to audition for Juilliard. Do you think I can try out? And he goes, well, sure, anyone can audition. But he says, well, we'll have to talk about, you know, your audition. So he says, why don't you come to my summer festival that was up in Maine. He was teaching at the Bowdoin Summer Music Festival.
Yeah.
So I went that summer when I was a senior. No, my junior, I think my junior year in high school. And it was just an eye-opener. I mean, the level of piano playing, the students were kids from Juilliard pre-college, and there were kids from Juilliard College attending, and my gosh, it was like piano playing that I've never ever heard before. It was almost like, my gosh, you know, like, I don't, like, do I know how to play the piano?
Sure.
It was almost that kind of level. I mean, the level was just incredibly, like, high, and I just got so inspired. And I came back and I said, oh my gosh, I'm really, really going to work towards my audition. And I got in, so.
What was it about his teaching, his pedagogy? What was it about him as an educator or a mentor? Is there one thing that really stands out to you?
You know, he was just notorious about clean playing, steady. That was like his thing. I mean, you can talk to any Canon student, and all he talked about at lesson was steady, don't rush, and very, you know, sparse use of the pedal. Many students tend to over pedal, and so he just drilled me back from the basics, and I am just forever grateful, you know, for that teaching, and I am. Probably, you know, many students whom I've taught, you know, says, oh my gosh, if you're going to be playing for Lisa, it's got to be steady. You can't rush. Do not rush.
Lisa,
Yes.
I want to go back to Martin Cannon and the not rushing thing, but I even want to go back further. Were your parents musicians?
No. My mom played a little bit. My grandmother my grandmother had 5 daughters, and she had all 5 of her daughters playing the piano, but none of them really actually kind of, you know, they didn't really quite make it. They quit, like, you know, a couple of years. So my mom did play a little bit, and she had, you know, some knowledge of piano. So she started me off when I was almost 4.
In Yokohama?
In Yokohama, yes. And she found me a teacher, and she was a singer, actually. So my teacher was very, you know, it was a fun piano lesson, and we did a lot of singing, and so. But my mom, or like even before, after lessons, she would be sitting next to me, you know, for a couple of hours, like drilling and having me practice. So the typical Asian, you know, like the tiger mom, she used to be.
We've talked about this many times on this show. So you're about 12 years old. You moved from Yokohama to Hawaii. When you moved to Kailua, by the way, I think I know some of my friends who went to high school with you at Kailua High. So I am, you know, my wife Chris and her friends. I think it's all the same generation. How did you find Mrs. Masaki? You just looked at the phone book, or?
So my mother, when we moved here, that was the first thing that was on her list, was to find me a piano teacher. So so she asked around, and my aunt, who had been already living here for many years, knew of somebody who was taking piano lessons. So so we found out that it was Ellen Misaki, and there was another teacher.
And so
That was, and so my mom happened to call Ellen Masaki first, and Ellen's like, okay, well, come over, and I'd love to hear Lisa play, and that was it.
So often when we teach students, inevitably at some point, and Dave, I'm sure you've gone through that, you have a teacher for a number of years, and at some point you change teachers, either because you move, like you yourself, or because your teacher tells you maybe it's time to try someone else. How was the transition between your Japanese teacher and Mrs. Masaki? Did you find that you had to redo some technique, or was there progression? And I guess I'm going to ask you the same question when you move to Mr. Cannon. Those transitions that sometimes are easy to make, but sometimes for students and parents, it's not always, a walk in the park.
So when I started lessons with Ellen Masaki, everything was just so. It was just like an eye opener, because the repertoire that she gave me, were such advanced, pieces, and pieces that I've never even imagined I would be playing as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, like for example, I had not really played any repertoire of Chopin, and not too many pieces that required pedaling.
Did you do a lot of scales or études in Japan?
It was a lot of technique. Yes. Hanon, Czerny, a lot of Mozart sonatas, lots of Bach, some Beethoven, but none of the romantic repertoire. Maybe perhaps Schubert. That was as far as but nothing beyond that. And I got here, and Ellen was. She started giving me all these substantial major works. I remember at 13, she gave me the Appassionata Sonata. I'm like, I would be playing it, but now if any student comes to me, at 13 playing the Appassionata Sonata, some students are so talented these days. They have the chops to be playing difficult pieces, but at 13, I'm like, the Appassionata Sonata, oh my gosh, But anyway, I had no clue, but
But maybe it's good. You learn it, and then you put it in your storage or closet, and then you bring it back.
Right.
Is there a piece like that for you, Iggy, that you, looking back, go, there is no way I should have been playing that at that time in my life?
I was a very obedient kid, as you know. I don't know. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. I don't know. So I would usually follow my teacher's advices, but I did have parents who were not professional musicians, like you said, but they loved the violin, and they would go to the bookstore and buy, Sarrazat's Gornerweisen and things like that, and I was way too young and inexperienced to start playing these pieces. I do think when I was about 13, 14, a classmate of mine at the Conservatoire de Paris, so a classmate of mine played Carmen Fantasy by Paolo di Sarasate, and I wanted to play that piece. I played it, and it was way too early for me, but sometimes when a kid just loves a piece, you can't. It's better to let them. But I'm sure that Mrs. Masaki thought you were talented enough to play the Appassionata. So tell us. Sorry, I'm kind of skipping ahead, but when you started with Mr. Cannon, how was that transition?
It was very difficult. Very, very difficult.
At the summer camp or at Juilliard?
At the summer camp. So in a way, I'm so grateful that he's invited me to attend the festival, because that gave me a knowledge, that prepared me, and in going forward to Juilliard, that there are certain expectations. I mean, there has to be a certain level of playing. I don't know for other teachers, but Martin Cannon had very, very high standards, and so I felt like as if I can't play the piano. I actually brought the Appassionata Sonata to him, and oh my gosh, I mean, did he just tear me apart? It was, I can't even tell you how devastated I was, going into that, coming out of that lesson. And so he started me from the basics again. And here I was in Hawaii, growing up in Hawaii. I probably won every single competition that I can think of, and I probably went to Bowdoin thinking like I'm like the best, and then there are all these like younger kids who were at the Juilliard pre-college and at the college level. So that was good. It just
was humbling but necessary.
Absolutely, yes.
Dave, we all had those humbling experiences. I remember when I was, again, at the Conservatoire National Supérieur de Musique de Paris, I had a very humbling experience, and my teacher, I played a piece, it wasn't very good. I was just saying in French because you can't translate in English, but he said, this is pipi. And then I played my second piece, and then he said, this is caca. So anyway, Dave, any humbling experience for you as a viola player?
Many. The life of a violist is always humbling. For me, when I was probably, it was soon after I made the switch from violin to viola, a teacher said, here's the Bartók Viola Concerto. Way too young.
How old were you?
I was probably 14 or 15. And just the technique needed to play that piece, let alone to understand the complexities of Bartók's music. And it's a piece that Bartók's Viola Concerto was written when he was very ill. There's stories about in the manuscripts, there's numbers written in, and they thought it was tempo markings, and it was actually, he was taking his temperature because he had a fever, and he eventually died while writing the piece. And so the piece was published after his death by a student of his, and so there's all these questions about the validity of all the work and all those fun things that musicians like us sit around and deliberate over. But yeah, that to me was kind of one of those pieces that I was pushed very hard at that point, but then when I look back, that's the reason that I was as successful as I was as a violist, is because I was pushed, and I had a teacher who knew that was what I needed next. And I arguably, I would say, had I not done that, I probably would have lost interest and would have played golf.
I wanted to talk about the old style teaching and the new style teaching, because we had our generation, Dave, I know. Anyway, we had strict teachers, and some of them, in France or in Europe, they would still smoke and during the lesson, and then they would just put the cigarette butt on the edge of the keyboard, and they would be very, very rude sometimes, and sometimes we would go home crying or trying to hide our tears, and they could be very insulting. And you skip to nowadays where you cannot say anything, and because we have the evaluation forms that the students fill out, and they can write anything, And I'm not a tenured professor at UH. I'm only adjunct, so I don't really care. But if I was on the tenure track, I wouldn't want my students to say, "This teacher is mean," right? But I don't know. Did you notice that, Lisa, where maybe today's teachers have? Definitely there are some things that are big no-nos that used to be, and that's good. That's out of the way. But do you feel like nowadays sometimes as a teacher there are things that you wish you could say that, I don't know, maybe some students are overly sensitive?
So most of my teaching I do is is at my festival, at the Aloha International Piano Festival. So there are many students who attend the festival. I teach them, and but basically. I say what I want to say. I mean, because I want to help the students out, but in a very nice way. Because after all, the students are customers.
And the customers are right.
Yeah. Were either of you ever thrown out of a lesson, showed up, started playing something, and shown the door?
No, not
No.
for me.
Almost.
Almost. Okay.
But, I have to say, looking back, right? So I had a teacher who was superb violinist, He won first prizes everywhere. And could be very mean to his students. But then in hindsight, then you learn a little bit more about your teachers and you find out that their own personal lives were quite rocky, that they had, maybe a father that, wasn't the greatest teacher and things like that. So, but of course, when you see them when you're 11, 12, 13 years old, you don't know those things. So, but that's the intricate, interesting, and fascinating dramatic life of teachers sometimes. Lisa, you mentioned your festival, and we'll get to that in just a second, but I actually had the honor of playing also with your teacher, Mr. Martin Cannon, and I felt like we had only a week, so we had maybe 3 rehearsals and the concert. I felt like the first rehearsal was sort of a detox, where you kind of remove everything that you don't need, all the parasites. And then you work from that core material that you've purified, I guess. And then as you move on to the second and third rehearsals, then the music starts to breathe very naturally. Did you find that also that you had to clean up maybe some things in your playing, and then after, I don't know how long you were with Mr. Cannon, and maybe 3-4 years, then you were able to grow naturally together? Or?
So I studied with him for 10 years, actually. It's quite rare that a student sticks to one teacher, for his or her undergraduate, master's, and doctorate. So when I started performing with Mr. Cannon, I mean, we did a couple of concerts together. We did 4 hands, 2 pianos. I knew exactly what he wanted me to do. In fact, my playing is probably very much similar to Martin Cannon. In fact, it was funny because one of the duets that we performed, he was rushing, and I said, "Mr. Cannon, you're rushing."
Is very,
Yeah,
so you felt a comfort zone where...
Oh, very much so.
That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, it's quite unique to have the one faithful teachers throughout your studies, because my wife also went to Juilliard. She spent 4 years with one teacher and then moved on to another teacher for the master's. Not rushing. That is so fascinating, because I see some people and I admire them. They're just so steady, and it doesn't matter if you're in a practice room, if you're at a bar playing on the piano bar, or at a concert hall in front of 2,000 people, it's always very even. I don't know how to do that. I get sometimes a little bit hyper, nervous, and then I start rushing. How do you do that?
I agree with you. So I am just always, that's just my thing. When I'm on stage, I'm like, I can't rush. Lisa, steady, steady, steady. Even till this day, I'm still very, very conscious about my about not rushing, because that used to be my problem. And I still listen to my recordings, and, it tends to go faster and faster. So
Dave, do you rush?
Oh my goodness, yes. But I'm thinking back
Maybe
to
a couple of glasses of wine?
yeah, that'll slow me down. Actually thinking back to my time at Juilliard, you could always tell when you were next to one of Cannon's students, because it was so methodical. But it's so interesting to hear you talk about that. I want to get to a couple of questions, because we're getting quite a few. Lisa, you've spurned a lot of questions this evening. So I want to start. Actually, this one's for Iggy. when did you start playing the Bach sonatas and partitas, perhaps the Bach Chaconne? At what age? At what level in your career have you played the Bach Chaconne?
That's a good question, because that actually, the Chaconne, it's my late father loved that piece, and he always wanted me to play it, and I just never felt like I was ready. But I learned it for a recital, and I was 13 or 14, but no, maybe 15. In hindsight, maybe later. But sometimes I wonder if I'm still too young to play it now. So I think, you might as well learn it when you're young and then get back to it like you did with the Bartok Concerto.
Yeah.
But my first Bach, however, was maybe when I was 10 or 11, which was, I think, probably a jig or a sarabande.
The first time I truly appreciated the Bach Chaconne was at Bowdoin, and it was Lewis Kaplan gave, it must have been a 4-hour conversation, as only he can do, on just the Bach Chaconne, and talking about the use of the golden number and going through literally measure by measure of that piece and his interpretation and the meaning, Bach's meaning behind the decisions that he made. But that is something, as soon as you said Bowdoin, that's exactly what I thought of, was listening to the Bach Chaconne. And yeah, it is one of those pieces that I think is very daunting for every instrumentalist, because it's something that keyboardists will play. It's something that I happen to come across on the harpsichord in my office actually quite frequently, because it lays very well on that instrument. But yes, the Chaconne.
Keyboard, and actually I enjoy the sonatas and partitas of Bach for violin being performed on other instruments. Yeah. The marimba is very nice. Even like transcriptions on the guitar is always very nice. Of course, there's so much material for the piano, you don't need to transcribe anything.
It's not like violists, don't need to transcribe everything. A question for you both, but directed at Iggy, but I think both of you will have an opinion on this. When teachers were difficult, when it was challenging, when it was hard with those teachers, what was it for you both that, what kept you going?
I'll go first. It's not an answer to your question directly, but sometimes I get very impatient with some of my own students, and especially before this show, the tuning up, this is live, right? So as I'm teaching in the afternoon, I'm thinking of tonight's show with Dave Moss, and it's giving me some stress. Not you, Dave, but just the show in general. And so I'm already stressed out a little bit, and I have to teach my students, and sometimes the stress transforms into frustration, and I take it towards my students. So apologies to my students. But so anyway, if my teachers are, well, it depends if it's now or when I was younger. So of course, when I was very young, before 12, I had a teacher who was really good, and she could be very hard, but it was fine. I didn't have a problem. Then when you go into your pre-teens, teenage years, Lisa, I don't know, it's a little more difficult because, being a pre-teen or a teen is a totally different story. And the answer to your question is not much, actually. It was difficult. What keeps me going? I'm not sure, because I also we moved to Paris, and I left my classmates in school, and I missed them, and I'd rather be playing soccer and things like that. So, but I think maybe just as you say so eloquently, the resilience. Being resilient,
yes.
I think, keeps you going. Lisa, what keeps you going?
So for me, it was about getting praised every week. I go in for a lesson, and Ellen would be like, oh, this is wonderful, great. Of course, when I got to Juilliard, at Bowdoin, things were, a little different, but I knew what Mr. Cannon's expectations were. So I was a really good student. I really, really was a good student. I practiced probably.
You persevered.
I did. I practiced probably eight hours a day while I was at Juilliard. And I wanted to get better. And I wanted Mr. Cannon to be happy with my playing. So every time I would go into lesson, I just wanted a great lesson. So that really kept me going.
That's amazing. It reminds me sometimes a young student, put them totally in the trust of their teachers. And if you have someone like Martin Cannon, it's wonderful. Do you find sometimes that you see some young students and they totally trust their teachers, but sometimes you have questions about that particular teacher? Because I'm asking you because sometimes I feel like sometimes I see some young students and they're so totally committed to their teachers, and sometimes not here in Hawaii, I just, when I go to the mainland, some kids, I just have some second thoughts, but I can't say anything because I'm not their father, I'm not their teacher, so I let, do you find that sometimes?
Well, thinking back to Martin Cannon's studio, he had an enormous studio. I think he had about maybe 50 students, maybe 60 students, and so of course he had very, very high expectations. So, but basically he was just, as I said, just notorious about not rushing. And all he would say at a lesson, sometimes a lesson can just be steady, steady, steady with his pencil going like this all the time. And some students just couldn't, they couldn't stand that.
Right.
I mean, there's more to it. There's more to music than not rushing, right? So there were many students who left him, I think, not many, a few students who left him because of that reason. And so, it just all depends, I think.
Yeah.
But once you get past that, then he'll really get into the music making, which was just, he is such an amazing musician.
Inspiring, very inspiring.
Yes, very much so.
I want to get to the festival that you've been doing, but maybe before we do that, Dave, do you want to offer some other, not quiz, but you mentioned about a new segment in our show?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been doing during this period of not having live performances is spending a lot of time looking at what other organizations are performing, really researching music, stretching the bounds of what I listen to, what I'm interested in, what we perhaps have missed throughout history. I'll tell you, I received a very thoughtful gift from a friend of mine who grew up here, a book by Amanda Beers on the forgotten women of classical music. Going back from all the way back from Caccini all the way through Boulanger, and it's a really interesting frame to think about everything that happened around the composers like Beethoven and Mahler and into the 21st century here.
And is that going to get to the quiz question?
It will get to the quiz question. Yes. So we thought that we would, on these Tuesday shows, share some new music, not necessarily music that was written yesterday or music that'll be written tomorrow. It could be that, of course. But we thought it would be fun for us to kind of talk about the things we're listening to, things that we're inspired by, kind of open our audience to some of the things that we're interested in. Yeah, Off the Beaten Path is, maybe we should rename the segment. I knew it would come out eventually here. And so this past week, I had been listening to music by the answer to our quiz question, Louise Farrenc, who was a French composer and pianist who was born in 1804. She was kind of bohemian, but grew up in Paris and was indeed the first female to be hired and to have tenure actually at the Paris Conservatoire. And she was composing in the time of Beethoven. She is a contemporary, and she studied with Hummel and a couple other very renowned composers. And it's actually Berlioz spoke incredibly highly of the orchestral works that she was writing. And the piece that I've sort of been drawn to over the past couple weeks here is actually her third symphony. And she was someone who, and I think this is one of the reasons that I've gravitated towards her and her music. She was very inspired by early music, by Baroque music and Renaissance music, and you hear a little bit of that in her symphonic work. So we haven't quite yet mastered how to turn on the radio here and play this for you right now. So throughout the week here and through our website and our social media channels and certainly through our email, we're going to share some of this repertoire that we are listening to and are inspired by, and hope that as we return to the stage, that some of these works will become more of the canon that we play alongside the great works of Beethoven and Brahms and Mahler and all of those important composers that have brought us to where we are today. So quiz answer was Louise Farrenc. And my choice for this week is her Symphony number 3, which we will be sharing. So what do you think?
Very good choice.
Yeah?
In fact, I have a small story about Farrenc, but Lisa, you mentioned Martin Cannon, but you also are a teacher yourself, and as your piece that we may not be familiar with, but you think we should all hear about, what is your piece of choice for tonight?
So my former student, TJ Tario, he was a local star here, grew up in Hawaii, also studied with the late Ella Masaki. After Ellen had passed away, I took him on and I got him into the Juilliard Pre-College. And he's a fine pianist, but he's also a very, very talented composer. So when he was 13, he really had no formal composition training or anything like that, but he just wrote a piece called Makika, which means mosquito, and he submitted to the MTNA, the composition competition, and the piece went all the way to the national finals. And I think he got third when he was 13. So when he got to Juilliard, he was also taking composition lessons from a composition faculty at Juilliard. And he really became quite a composer. While he was in New York, he was selected to be one of the fellows of composition fellows of the New York Youth Symphony, and they performed his symphonic work. Anyway, so at my festival, he had written a piece, a duet, a four-hand piece for myself and John Nakamatsu to play, and I think we world premiered it in 2017 or 18 or something like that. But it was a very, very well thought out, tricky and difficult piece. I mean, John was like, my gosh, he goes, this is difficult. But it was very interesting. Some of the things, I mean, that you can actually do with a piano, such as plucking. I mean, that's sort of traditional among contemporary compositions. But like at the end, he wanted me to just go bam, and the way I did it, TJ's like, Lisa, you got to do it like more. He's like, just like you're upset with something. And so that was like the end of the piece. And after bam, John would like, slam the keyboard, the cover down. But we didn't do that because, we didn't want to get sued by UH, we didn't want to ruin the piano at UH. So anyway, we didn't do that, but very, very well thought out piece. So
beyond his years.
Yes.
So we have TJ Tario and Louise Farrenc. So I have to confess that even though I attended the Conservatoire National Supérieur de Musique de Paris, I hadn't quite heard of Louise Farrenc. A few years ago, here, I think our colleagues of Chamber Music Hawaii did a couple pieces by Louise Farrenc. But the first time I heard of her was through a French horn player. We were doing a festival in Jeju Island in Korea, and he had just done a CD of her chamber music selections. It was funny because we were having lunch, I remember, and he ordered a steak, and all the while he was talking about Louis Farinck. Oh, merveilleux, merveilleux, c'est la musique, très bon. And then all the while he'd be ordering his steak, and to the Korean waiter, he said, I will have a steak very rare. And so, but then in Korean, you don't really have an R or L. So the waiter would say, 알았어요, very rare, very rare. No. And my friend would say, not very well, very rare. And the Korean waiter would say, 알았어요, very rare. So it went on for a while. So anyway, that's how I remember the music of Louis Farinck. I'm sorry, it's apology. But sorry, maybe I should move on to my piece. And we don't have too much time because we want to get to Lisa's festival. My piece is Olivier Sion, because that's also in France. I grew up. And Olivier Messiaen was teaching at the Conservatoire National Supérieur de Musique de Paris. And he retired in 1978. I joined the conservatory in 1982, and we performed with the student orchestra his piece called L'Ascension. Messiaen was a very religious, devout Catholic, and of course the L'Ascension is a very religious piece. It has not 4 movements, he called it, but 4 meditation, and I especially like the last one. It's I have to look at my notes, but he had different techniques, and one of them is called limited transposition. I don't quite know the details, but let's say you take a pentatonic scale, which is da 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 da, and then you do another starting on D, da 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 da, and then you play them together. That's sort of a limited transposition. Sorry, I thought those sonorities were sort of otherworldly. I mean, the music is not nice music. It almost takes you to a different world. And so that's my piece for today. Olivier Messiaen, TJ Theriault, and Louis Farinck.
Yeah. I am just, is it just me, or are you just absolutely amazed that he was able to do that, to sing the pentatonic scale like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, anyway.
Thank you, Iggy. Yeah, that was a wonderful recap of all those. So we'll have this on our website, and we'll, of course, work with our friends here at the Hawaii Theater Center to provide this as well. But, I think this really is an opportunity for us as we continue to look forward to returning to the concert hall, as we did with the Sounds of Resilience programming over the past 5 months here, 8 months here, 10 months here, whatever we're at this point, to explore some new repertoire for the Symphony Orchestra. So thank you both for participating in that. I really... that was fun.
It's fun. Lisa, so we briefly mentioned, but let's talk about one of what you must be very proud of is the Aloha International Piano Festival. How did that come about? Why did you decide to do a piano festival here in Hawaii? And then how were you able to attract so many kids from Japan and all over?
Well, so I founded the festival in 2006, and so last year, yes, in 2020 was supposed to be my 15th anniversary. However, we had to cancel due to the COVID pandemic. I wanted to start a piano festival because of my experience that I had at Bowdoin. So, like I said, when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to participate in a world-class music festival, to be able to study with teachers like Martin Cannon, and also with Louis Kaplan. I had chamber music studies with him. But I wanted to do something of that caliber here in Honolulu. I wanted to give the students here, local students here especially, an opportunity to study with world-class artists because they don't have the resource, they don't have the connection like kids do on the mainland. So I thought of bringing the artists here to Hawaii so that our local kids would have the opportunity to study with them.
And it's quite a big enterprise. You had to rent out the convention center, right?
Yes. Yes, in the first few years were just, I had maybe 15 students signing up for the academy. So everything was just trial and error, and trying to figure out how to make this thing work. And Martin Cannon was a huge part. He was such a big part, and so because he was on the faculty, we did attract many students because they all wanted to study with Martin Cannon.
And you've brought John Nakamatsu, Sarah Buechner. One pianist who I enjoyed very much when I was living in Colorado was John Bayless. He would do those pops concert, and someone from the audience would yell out, "Hey, can you do the chaconne in the style of the Beatles?" And he would just do it on the spot. And you brought him here, and you actually have a very interesting story about John Bayless and some ice skating from Japan. Tell us about it.
So John Bayless, as many of you know, he is a crossover pianist. So like you said, he plays a Beatles tune in the style of Bach, and phenomenal pianist. Unfortunately, he had a stroke, and the stroke took away his mobility on his right hand. So he started playing just with the left hand. But anyway, but he has many recordings out, and one of his recordings is the Puccini album, and a Japanese figure skater.
So the Puccini, he has variations of Madame Butterfly.
Madame Butterfly, yes, and there's a celebrity Japanese figure skater. Her name is Satoko Miyahara. She was in the previous Winter Olympics that was held in Pyeongchang, and she was this close to getting the bronze medal, and but unfortunately she came in 4th place. But she skated to John's Madame Butterfly. So John I get a phone call from Johnny. He goes, Lisa, are you watching the Olympics now? And I'm like, yes. And he goes, are you like watching like now? I'm like, yes. And he goes, do you know the Japanese figure skater, Satoko Miyahara? I said, well, yeah, of course, she's a celebrity. I know of her. He goes, do you know her personally? I'm like, no, like I wouldn't know a figure skater. But anyway, he says she is just a beautiful, beautiful skater. He says, I've never seen anybody, well, he's never seen a skater skating to his music. So he was so impressed, and he asked me if I could set something up so that he could meet with her. I said, well, I'll try, and I'll see what I can do. So in the meantime, he posts all this on Facebook, and somebody saw his post, and this lady happened to be a figure skating fanatic. And she says, well, if you write a letter to Satoko, I'll try to get that over to her. So in the meantime, the Olympics was held in February. Johnny wrote a letter, and then that letter got to Satoko's manager in June. And they were thrilled that, the actual artist was very much impressed with Satoko, because normally an artist would be very upset when a figure skater, when their music has been chopped and spliced and connected and all that. So, but they were very, very grateful that Johnny really loved her her skating. So he got in touch with the manager, and the manager happened to be in Honolulu in June.
Whose manager?
Satoko's manager,
okay.
I'm sorry, yes. And so John happened to be at my festival performing in June, so they said, oh my gosh, let's meet. So they met here, and the following month in July, Johnny he flew over to Toronto where she was training.
Oh, she was training.
Yes, and they got to meet, and the whole Japanese TV crew came to do a filming, and it was big news. They did a documentary about their meeting.
Wow. It's all thanks to you.
Yes, and there's more to it. Okay. So after that, so when I found out that this documentary was going to be televised throughout Japan, I said, oh my gosh, I got to bring Johnny in to play a concert with Satoko in the audience. So I get in touch with her manager. So this is in September of 2018. And they were thrilled about this idea. So I presented a concert at Tokyo Suntory Hall in January of 2019. And everything just happened like boom, boom, boom. I mean, it was such an
So you booked
such an
a theater
amazing,
for them.
I did. So I also got to play in the concert.
Amazing.
Yes, and Satoko Miyahara was just such a graceful person and yeah, lovely, lovely individual.
Dave, from Chicago, are you a graceful ice skater as well?
You know, I make my way on the ice just fine, thank you. More of a hockey skater than a figure skater, I'll say. But you know, I have been missing, although the temperature in here reminds me of it, the ability to go out and ice skate.
I'm actually, it's a little cold, so I'm also shaking a little bit.
Someone commented that we're all in blue. We're all in navy, but that's actually just the temperature in the theater tonight. So we love being here. Thanks for the support of Hawaii Theater Center. Actually, before we leave the festival, is there an amateur program as well? And hi, Mari, thanks for the question.
Absolutely, and in fact, it was Mari who had suggested that I start the amateur program at the Aloha International Piano Festival. So thanks to Mari, thank you, Mari. The amateur program has been doing extremely well.
Wonderful.
It's really incredible. You know, there are so many amateurs out there who are eager to continue their piano studies.
Yeah. Well, we certainly enjoyed having Mari on our season finale back in December. So a wonderful connection to our conversation with you here tonight. It's been so wonderful to have you back in Hawaii with us for this, and so enjoyed your time. I do need to name a winner for the quiz. We actually had a couple of answers that were correct, but the first one in that was correct and was a local resident was Scott Schultz. So Scott, we've got a wonderful bottle of wine. I think it's wonderful. Will be headed your way soon. And just before we wrap up our conversation here tonight, I wanted to share some real highlights from our December, a few things that we've been hearing, the impact that we've had on our community through our continued dedication to our mission here at the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. And the first was our collaboration with Ballet Hawaii, our Nutcracker production, which was aired 3 times on KITV. And we had over 30,000 people view that through our local television station here. And really just when we talk about the impact that we can have inside and outside the concert hall, there has been a little bit of silver lining throughout this, that we can reach so many people here in Hawaii through that collaboration. Now, the other program that we put together in Lightspeed, and it was wonderful to have Ron Artis II and Tyler Neist with us here on Tuning Up a few weeks back. But the program that we did with Ron, Journey Together, ended up being aired over, I think, 5 times in total on the Hawaii News Now networks, and we had over 200,000 televisions view that performance, that collaboration with the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra here at the end of the year, and on January 1st as well, kicking off the new year for us. So thank you all who had tuned in to those performances and made those such a success. I'm so grateful for all the sponsors and the supporters and the donors and our subscribers and everyone who continue to sustain us during this period when we're not able to pack the historic Hawaii Theater with our patrons. So we appreciate your understanding and your continued trust in our organization throughout this. I remain incredibly optimistic and confident about the future of the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. There's as many have written in and told us, we being mission driven and really being able to provide music to our community has really touched so many people, and I'm grateful for the musicians and our board and everyone who has made that possible last year. It's really set the bar quite high for 2021. But I think only good things to come for us. So
we forgot to mention that, Lisa, you've been a solo performer in the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra a couple of times.
Yes.
We'll save that for next time.
Yes.
Yes,
Sorry,
your
Dave.
return on the show. Yes, there were so many questions we actually didn't get to in our hour. It must be because we're rusty from 2 weeks off. So we'll have to have you back very soon here on Tuning Up, and I think hopefully with the orchestra as well in the very near future. So, Iggy, before we go, any last thoughts?
It's good to be back here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Lisa,
Thank you
and
so
look
much.
forward to a bright future here in 2021. Thank you all for the support, and we'll see you back here next week. We'll be joined by a cellist in the orchestra, Joshua Nakazawa. Very looking forward to that conversation.
Absolutely.
So tune in next week, and thanks again for your support. Mahalo.
Life changed so fast.
During COVID, we've had a chance to think about what's really important in our lives.
The arts are an expression of what it's like to be human.
To feel, to help us make sense of our world. Does it mean anything if no one sees it?
Training and dedication are stronger than any virus.
We all need to express ourselves.
Keep doing the things that make you happy.
So when the lights come back up,
We'll all be ready.
For the last 24 years, your nonprofit Historic Hawaii Theater has helped millions of people explore and experience the wonder of music, theater, and culture. From school plays to Broadway shows, from the Brothers Kaz to the Beach Boys, we've transported you from Hawaii to the moon and back. Won't you become a member today and help preserve this last remaining historic show palace? Go to hawaiitheater.com. Become a member today. We can't do it without your support. Mahalo.